Welcome on in, everyone, to another episode of Let's Talk Utes. Today, we are coming off a huge win at Oklahoma State. Many people said it was, potentially the hardest game of the year. The Utes get up 22-3 in the fourth quarter before ultimately giving up a couple late touchdowns and winning 22-19. Landon, let's start with you. What sticks out to you about this game?
Yeah, I mean, my first thoughts on this game is sometimes it can be hard to watch like a super defensive performance with a lot of running and ball possession. I will say for me though, doing it against an opponent like Oklahoma State made it such a better watch than other games this has happened. I just thought it was so impressive how Utah completely controlled the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. That was a huge question mark people had about Utah transferring to the Big 12. I think that people who were more familiar with Utah's program understood that they were going to be fine, if not excel even more physically in the Big 12. But there was a lot of doubters. And so Utah absolutely erased doubts from basically anyone's mind on the physicality aspect of how that's going to transfer to the Big 12.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like this game really was the first one that defined Utah's identity definitively, because I feel like the SUU game, it's always tough to get a feel for what a team is like, especially when you're playing an FCS opponent, just because everybody blows out FCS opponents for the most part. The Utah State game was a weird one just because we were playing with a semi-closed playbook with Isaac, and same kind of deal with Baylor. But I feel like this one, with our freshman quarterback heading into Stillwater, getting a W against a number 14 ranked team in the nation, really speaks volumes about where this team's at mentally, as well as physically. I mean, I feel like we dominated both sides of the game for 3.5 quarters, and I think the most impressive part of it was that Isaac was able to execute for the most part extremely well. Obviously, there were some mistakes, but it's true freshman on the road. Those are to be expected, but overall, just really impressed by the Utes.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you guys are saying. Let's start a little bit here on the defensive side of the ball. The defense today was really the real MVP, having such a magnificent performance until about 6 minutes left where, maybe they changed their scheme or they took their foot off the gas a little bit and let Oklahoma State score a bit. But really, this was, a near shutout performance. I did think it was interesting how, Oklahoma State in their first few games were scoring, 40 or more than 40 points in every single game. And then this one, an offensive performance totally out of the ordinary for the rest of their season. I did think it was funny to see them, thinking, oh, it's something wrong with the play call. It's something wrong with the players. We're doing something differently. To me, they really didn't do much differently. They just played a defense that could actually guard what they do, because they really haven't been able to run the ball effectively for the whole season. They were definitely not able to run the ball effectively against Utah. And, our corners are just a lot better than any corners they've played. And so passing was much harder.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, Morgan Scalley is the absolute man. I think he's the best defensive coordinator in the entire country, and he showed that today. Like, when someone's been in college for 7 years, like Alan Bowman, you would think that he's seen about every look a defense can give. It just blew my mind where Mike Gundy said they had to bench Bowman for a little bit, in his words, to let him cool down, because he was just frazzled out there. I think that's just something insane, and that is major credit to Morgan Scalley and the Utah defense for being able to do that.
Yeah, totally echo everything that was said. I think, it's impressive that we were able to get inside of the head of a seventh-year senior that, like you guys have said, was scoring. I think they scored, in the 40s against Arkansas, another Power 5 SEC team. And the fact that Utah was able to hold them 3 points until the fourth quarter speaks volumes about the way this defense performs. There were a few standout performances. I thought Elijah Scooby Davis played amazing. He had the interception, the over the shoulder back half of the football grab. That was just awesome. Teo Johnson has always played amazing. I thought our defensive line did what we needed to do to stop Ollie Gordon. Again, Ollie Gordon really never got going. That was more or less the expectation, just because he hadn't been really lighting it up this year at all. But I think we did a great job, stopping the run up front for the most part. The defense, when we went into prevent towards the end of the game, I think the mentality changed a little bit, And, that's what caused them to really get back into the game for the last, 4 or 3 minutes, left in the game. But other than that, the defense just played exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, like looking at the win probability, like Utah was never really in big trouble in this one. Like Oklahoma State never had the second half with a chance to, take the lead. Utah was completely in control, completely dominant there. And I think that, yeah, they just controlled the game really well. Something I want to point out is Alan Bowman, like we said, seventh year quarterback, has seen a ton, played a ton of football, less than 50% completion percentage. And a lot of the passes were off target. And while Utah only got one sack from a really nice play from, Van Fillinger, where he just collapsed the pocket and took him down, I think that the pressure did get to Bowman because he has an insanely fast time to throw, one of the quickest in the country. And so even though you're not going to get a lot of sack totals on a team like that, think of Oregon last year where Bo Nix just got the ball out so quickly, like it's almost impossible to sack him. Bowman is similar. He just gets the ball out so quick, so it's so tough to sack. But the defensive line was getting enough push that his offensive linemen were way closer to him. And he had some happy feet, didn't have his feet set on a couple throws, and that caused some inaccuracy, which caused him to, have a less good completion percentage. And I think that's really credit to, especially the guys in the middle, to Funa and Tanavasa. And while their stats may not jump off the page this game, they had a huge impact, in my opinion.
Yeah, the defensive culture this Utah team has is just unbelievable under Scally. I don't know if you guys caught this, but Utah always releases like a player of the week. They removed the defensive players of the week and had 4 special teams players of the week because of just the last, basically the end of the fourth quarter. I don't know if you guys saw that. There wasn't a defensive player of the week.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually wild.
That's
it
insane.
means so much to Scally.
Like Scally was that pissed that he started calling like a little bit of a softer, like more prevent defense, and the players gave up those touchdowns. There was no defensive player of the week. They got removed.
Yeah. I do think it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for Big 12 teams to adjust to like Utah style, because a lot of the Big 12 teams have 3-down linemen and it's more focused on speed rather than bulk. Whereas Utah, has a lot of big boys up front that, physically want to push your line back. And I think that's going to be a big adjustment for the Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one more thing on Alan Bowman is if you watched I think he did an interview today after Monday's practice, and he said that Utah was just throwing looks his way that he had just never ever seen before, even on film. Primarily, they were in a cover one with Teo Johnson deep as the safety, and it clearly shook him. And for like Tanner said, somebody who's a 7th-year senior who's seen it all, for him to be rattled so hard that he had to come out in the third quarter just to cool down and to actually see what was happening in the game is just a testament to Scally, how talented his guys are, and how talented of a coach he is. And kind of unrelated, but that's why I'm so excited to have him as next head coach in waiting.
Absolutely. He's really removed all doubt. Like he's the guy to lead the program into the future, whether Witt retires this year or next year. Scally's ready to take over, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
One more thing I'd like to touch on the defensive side of the ball.
This one was, kind of okay. Yeah, go for it.
One more thing I would want to touch on is we've heard it a lot. I don't think Bowman played that bad of a game, honestly. I don't think his receivers had much separation, and I think the Utah DBs made great plays on the ball. Like, honestly, there just wasn't a lot of places for him to go with it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And like there was a lot of passes defended for the Utah cornerbacks in this game. Like the cornerbacks were right there. Like Bowman honestly could have thrown 5 picks just because of like how good the defense was. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the offense. Obviously, this was more, without Rising, game time decision. We can talk a little bit about that. Without Rising, I don't think it was the explosive performance most Utah fans were hoping for. It was more of a, workman-like, get our points, even on a couple of third downs when we were in scoring position, we would just, set up a run right to the center so our kicker didn't miss, just kick a field goal and take the 3 points and get out of there because the defense was playing so well. Landon, what sticks out to you offensively?
I think you have to start with Isaac Wilson. This is a true freshman that went into statistically the hardest place to win in the Big 12, well, not including Utah. And he didn't flinch whatsoever. He went in, he executed, he played well, and he made enough plays to win this game for Utah. And that was just super impressive to me.
Yeah, I think Isaac Wilson obviously with a standout performance. True freshman, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, threw for 207 yards. But like obviously there were mistakes there if you watch the game. But I think anytime you go into Stillwater with a true freshman, I mean, you tell somebody that Isaac Wilson's starting the beginning of this game, and you tell them the result, they're taking that every single day of the week. So really glad to that the offense was able to get at least something going. Bernard was by far and away my MVP of this game. Just an absolute dominating performance. Everybody's seen that clip where he shook the 3, 4, 5
It
guys
was
maybe
beautiful.
and stripped a huge run down the sideline for 50 or 60 yards, which set us up for for another scoring drive. So just really impressed. Dorian Singer had his first really big come out game, I feel like, as a Ute, and even without Cam throwing him the ball, Isaac was still able. I feel like Dorian Singer was a great fallback plan for Isaac Wilson, just because he's so talented. Everybody's seen the ball pinned against the helmet catch, and he had so many impressive, so many impressive yards after contact. I feel like, and he's just an impressive receiver. Utah's lucky to have him. But just an overall really outstanding performance from the offense with Isaac Wilson starting.
Yeah, I did think it was wild, like how much more composed Isaac Wilson looked than Alan Bowman, who's a seventh year senior at home. Isaac Wilson, 18 years old, true
Hmm.
freshman on the road. I thought that was crazy. I thought Isaac Wilson made two bad throws. The one bad throw was the interception he threw when he was kind of just short arm that, miss short. The safety or DB was able to jump the route and get an interception. And the second bad throw I thought he made was the one to Singer in the end zone that was incomplete. If he puts that one a little further back, I think Singer can run under that, and that's a touchdown. The first interception, I didn't think that was on him. I thought that was a coaching error because Utah, before that play, had lined up, had run the play, started the play. So they were 10 yards into all their routes. Then the play was whistled dead for a pre-snap penalty, which I think was either a delay of game or, an illegal motion or something like that. Then coming out of that, they run the exact same play. The safety knows exactly what's going on because we've shown him the wheel route. We've kind of shown our hand, and he just jumps the route. And so I honestly think that, while Wilson should still be always aware of the safety, that was more of a coaching interception, the first one. And I think that it's pretty wild that, he was able to convert fourth downs with his legs. He was able to convert that one big third down where he had almost a 50-yard run. That really just showed like what he's going to be when he gets to his best, because I think that there's so much potential there. If he just irons out the issues, like we're looking at the best quarterbacks in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
That dude's
completely
got
agree with you.
wheels.
Another interesting thing to
Yeah.
talk about with Isaac Wilson's composure, I don't know, I'm sure many have already heard Utah tight end Brant Keithy's comments on this, but he gave a pretty inflammatory press conference. He said that last week wasn't really hard at all, which is crazy. And then he also said that when Utah's playing at home, Utah's student section is louder when they're on offense than the Oklahoma State student section was when Utah was on offense away, which is just insane. And he said it wasn't really a crazy environment. And I thought that was such an interesting comment because so many people didn't believe that the Pac 12 had those rowdy environments. They were all envisioning like a Cal or a UCLA, when in reality, that's just not the truth. Like Keithy's a veteran, he's played in a lot of away stadiums. And like I genuinely think it was his honest opinion that Oklahoma State wasn't that rowdy of an environment.
Yeah, I feel like I mean Keithy was one guy who played in the swamp in 2022. The opener. He's also played at Rice Eccles, one of, the probably top 15, top 10 environments in college football. It's one of the most underrated as well. He definitely knows what a rocking crowd feels like. He's played at Autzen. And so yeah, I feel like I mean as an observer, as somebody watching through the TV, to be honest with you, and this is no diss on Oklahoma State or, I'm sure the tailgating scene's awesome and the crowd and everything in the stadium in general. But to be honest, like it felt dead, and maybe a huge factor was the heat. I know it was about 100
Mm-hmm.
degrees in the stands and about 130, 140 on the turf. So I feel like that was a really large factor in why it may have been a little bit quieter than I expected it to. Just because, and Tanner's alluded to this multiple times, that the loudest chant that came through the TV was like a "Let's go Utah" chant towards the end of the game. And not saying Oklahoma State didn't make noise, because especially on those first couple drives, you could definitely hear them. But I don't know. I guess for all the off-season talk, I guess I expected a little bit more out of Stillwater, but that's just coming from me.
Oh yeah, I totally agree, Connor. I was definitely disappointed as I had the exact same thought about the Heat and especially the style of game it was. Like
Mhm.
what did Oklahoma State have to cheer for really? Like
Well,
there
they
was
were
never really
booing.
Yeah, exactly. They were booing more than they were cheering. And so I think the Heat combined with the style of play like really just didn't lend itself to a good environment. I'm sure if it was a night game, like we would really feel like what Oklahoma State
Mhm.
could do because like I know they can do better than that. Like that was disappointing. And like I think even Oklahoma State fans would say it wasn't their best environment.
For sure. Like I
Yeah.
imagine even at Rice Eccles playing like a 4 p.m. game, extremely hot outside. There's been some lackluster environments, like seriously. Like
It just
it's
happens.
a
Yeah,
real
like Utah's
factor.
not yeah, Utah it
Like no
happens to
one's
Utah too.
immune to it. Like that's actually a terrible time to play a game in that heat. Like I kind of feel bad for them.
Yeah, humidity, and it just didn't factor out well, which it is what it is. Both teams have to show up, but
Hmm.
at the end, Utah just took advantage.
Like
Yeah.
like
I want to give
Keanu
one more
Tanavasa says, we bring the weather.
yeah, exactly. I want to give one more shout out to Bernard. I just thought he's so good, and he's really grown into that role as a lead back, where he just looks so explosive. He looks fast. He literally hit the sickest hezzy move I've ever seen on that long run.
Oh.
The dude literally had no ankles after that. It was crazy.
Yeah, I feel like for the first time in his career, he looks like a clear-cut RB1, kind of Swiss Army knife, do it all. Where, like when he was lined up and he was, running up the middle, I don't know if it was a mix of Oklahoma State's front being bad and Utah's push being great, but he was gashing it felt like every single run play for like 6 or 7 yards at least in in the first half, and especially the third one. Oklahoma State was kind of getting worn down. So yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, totally agree with you there.
It always felt like he was one missed tackle away from like a huge chunk play. And like that ended up
Mhm.
showing up, but like I feel like he could have had like 8,
Oh yeah, big
Man,
time.
Bernard's conditioning as well was extremely impressive because his main, I hate to call it like a flaw because it's out of his control sometimes, was just the cramping and the injury prone. I feel like,
Mhm.
dude, 25 carries in that heat in a physical game, that is extremely impressive.
Oh, for sure. Like that'll probably be like the hardest game physically for him the
Yes.
entire year.
Like he over
sure.
doubled up Ollie Gordon in carries and had more
Yeah.
yards per carry.
I also think the key stat from this game was time of possession.
Mm-hmm.
42 minutes to 17 minutes. That's almost 3 quarters to 1 quarter. I saw a stat on Twitter that was the longest time of possession Utah's ever had in the Kyle Whittingham era, and it was the shortest time of possession Oklahoma State has ever had in the Gundy era. And I think that really sums up the game.
Yeah,
Mhm.
building on
No,
that,
totally agree.
actually, Utah leads the Big 12 in time of possession, and the two teams at the very bottom, I mean, obviously statistically, are Oklahoma State and Baylor.
Yeah, that's funny because they're the two teams Utah's
Yeah,
played,
exactly.
obviously.
Which makes sense because Utah's dominated time of possession for both of them, so they're going to be near the bottom, but they both are literally like 16 and 15.
It'll be interesting to see if that stat changes at all once Rising is, well, I don't even, you know what? I don't even know if Rising's going to play this year at this point.
He might be
Yeah,
dead.
let's talk about
yeah.
that right now. Let's talk about the game time decision because there was all the reports came out about 30 minutes before the game. Oh, Rising's playing, Rising's taking snaps with the starting center. He's good to go. He's going to give it a try. And then, first possession out trots Isaac Wilson.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to feel. I think for the first time, and maybe I'm speaking just for myself and not for Utah fans, but I feel like this is the first time where I feel like a majority of Utah fans are more upset that, like, specifically not at the situation, but more so at Cam himself, because I feel like last year, obviously you're not going to play on a bum knee. You can't. That's not safe. And he was obviously just recovering from a brutal surgery. But I feel like, and none of the fans know the complexity of the situation, right? But I feel like a lot of fans were extremely disappointed in the way that he just chose not to play. I think obviously Cam's gonna let the guy who is going to give Utah the best chance to win all the snaps. And I feel like it truly was a game time decision. I truly believe that Cam wanted to play. I just don't think he had the ability. I think he had the ability to play, but probably not to the point where he thought he would be better than Isaac Wilson, simply just because of like his grip strength. So I don't know. I think in the era of NIL and paying players, a certain amount of money to come play, I think Utah fans are starting to expect, hey man, like tough it out. You're here, we're paying you, like let's go. It's kind of kicking into go time, especially after last year's QB fiasco. I feel like people are starting to get major PTSD, I feel like this week is the first week where like you can physically feel the frustration in like the Utah fan base. And again, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but from what I'm seeing on Twitter and from what I'm, talking to different Utah fans, I feel like the frustration's starting to boil over a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you. From what I've seen, the temperature on this is definitely rising. I mean, play on words right there. But it just feels like it's crossed the threshold of like normal injury to just like confusion, where it's become really confusing to fans, to outsiders. Like, what's really going on with Rising? Like, is he actually just made of glass? Or like, is he just the unluckiest person that's played college football in the last 10 years? I don't know. And I mean, like, at the root of it all, if he wasn't so good, no one would care. But it's just he's so good when he plays. It's so tough to see him on the sideline when you know he could be playing for your team.
Well, obviously, like I don't think this is happening, but I feel like some people are getting the impression that because NIL exists, that he's just taking Utah for the runaround, and he's gonna play 4 quarters of football or however many quarters of football he's played so far, and just get paid another 1.2 or however much we're paying him. I know it's in the millions. So, and I think I think that's happening? No, but is it a possibility to be considered, especially in the NIL era? I think it'd be ignorant to not assume that that could be a possibility. Again, with Rising, I think he's one of the most competitive people that we've had on the team. I don't think that's happening, but I think that's where people's heads are starting to go, and I feel like that's where the QB I guess transparency with Wit and among the coaching staff. I feel like the pent up frustration is just kind of rearing its head right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, a common argument from a lot of people is, oh, like the players know, like it doesn't affect, like it's a competitive advantage, but like we have to be on the good side of like the big boosters that are paying a lot of NIL. Like if they start getting frustrated and they start withholding money, like that's where it actually affects the team. And like you don't want that, which is why I'm in favor of like clearer injury reports,
Yep.
And to Connor's point of like, just taking the runaround for NIL, I definitely don't believe that's happening with Rising this year. I think that if he could play, he would. I do see like more credence to that like in the previous year because everyone was acting like Rising 7 months off like a brutal ACL tear, which is, typically a 9 to an 11-month injury, was just going to like pick back up and play like right away. It's like I kind of see it there where Rising's like, are they going to pay me to sit on the bench in rehab this year? Or, do I need to make it seem like I'm going to play so that I can get that still? But this year, I do think that, he's just having injuries, but it's been so long since he's played, only 3 quarters in the last 2 years. I do think, like you guys said, it's getting a little frustrating because we all love Rising. Like we all want Rising to play. He took us to 2 championships in the Pac-12, and for that alone, he's worth the NIL we've paid him, in my opinion, at least. I would pay him double just for that,
Same.
And so yeah, but like we all want Rising to play, and like it's just frustrating when there's no info on why he doesn't. Like he was a game time decision this week at Oklahoma State, and the majority of people I've heard this week are still expecting Wilson to play against Arizona, which is like crazy if he was truly a game time decision at Oklahoma State. I mean,
yeah, no, totally agree.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this game, Utah versus Oklahoma State? Maybe we could talk about Big 12 title implications potentially. I think this kind of puts Utah in the driver's seat for the Big 12 championship. Obviously, many people said that this was the toughest game on the schedule, first Big 12 conference game going to Oklahoma State, who was also considered one of the contenders and winning. If I'm being honest, Utah's runway looks pretty clear to me. Like I think that the ceiling the floor is really, really high. I think that, you know, 1 or 2 losses at most, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
especially if Oklahoma State beats Kansas State next week, the tiebreaker situation is also looking extremely good for Utah because Utah doesn't have a chance to play Kansas State. And so if they have 2 conference losses immediately, Utah still is basically a lock in every scenario, even if they do drop a conference game. It just puts you in such a good position.
Yeah, I think especially after this weekend of football in the Big 12, honestly, nobody looks dominant except for Utah. BYU looked dominant against Kansas State, but you know I'm not forgetting the SMU game. BYU, I feel like a lot of people are hyping up BYU, and you know it's hard to beat a Kansas State team by double digits. I mean, it was a complete mollywhopping in Provo, but at the same time, I feel like they also have had their own issues. Their offense still looks pretty questionable at best. And if you actually look at the box score of that game, it tells kind of a different story about the way Kansas State honestly dominated that game in every facet. I think it was just kind of a weird Saturday night in Provo that kind of alluded to just kind of a weird blowout victory. And you've had teams like Kansas that have just kind of fallen to the wayside that had huge expectations. I guess similar to Oklahoma State. I mean, I'm excited to see Oklahoma State, Kansas State play just because we'll get to see if OSU is really bad at football like they showed against Utah, or if the offense can rebound and the defense can kind of get it together and shut down a dangerous Avery Johnson. Arizona, another one of those teams that have fallen to the wayside. So I agree with you, Tanner. I feel like the Big 12 championship is really Utah's to lose at this point, or at least a spot in that game. And at this point, I honestly, besides maybe Iowa State, UCF, I honestly don't have an idea of who's going to be playing in that title game.
Yeah, I think that as well. Like, I'm pretty confident Utah is going to be in that title game, but I think no is really murky, like who's their opponent is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Okay, should we move on to Arizona?
Do it.
So this week, the Utes take on the Arizona Wildcats, who are coming off a bye this previous week. The week before that, they played at Kansas State on a Friday night and got beat 31-7. Kind of really, dominated in the run game. Noah Fafita, kind of a slowish start to the year. I would say Arizona in general hasn't really looked good. The coaching downgrade from Fish, to me, looks pretty significant. I mean, they hired a guy with a 40% win percentage at San Jose State. Not exactly the most encouraging hire, I would say. But this is a team that came in with lofty expectations, and they're looking to recapture that magic off a bye week. What do you think about this matchup this week, Landon?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to see a team like Arizona regress so much just due to like their athletic department's budget. They clearly could not get a candidate that they really wanted, and they didn't have enough money to keep Fish. And so losing your coach as well as losing like some key players around the team, it's hurt them a lot. It's almost like a compounded effect where they've regressed quite significantly from last year. They struggled with line of scrimmage massively against Kansas State. They just, on offense, they couldn't really block. On defense, they couldn't get pressure or stop the run. This is a team that's regressed, but still has 2 very, very talented players in Noah Fafita and T-Mac. So I still think they're dangerous, but I think they are a clear step down from last year.
Yeah, I think you described it perfectly. I think Jed Fish leaving that program was honestly backbreaking for them. Brent Brennan, when he was hired on, was described as more of a player's coach, more of a culture guy than a winning coach, which I think in some scenarios can work. But I think in this scenario, it's clearly not working, or at least not working to the expectation that Arizona had in the preseason, coming off a huge bowl win against Oklahoma. And then, getting blown out by Kansas State, almost losing to, I guess keeping it close with Northern Arizona, and
It's almost more
allowing UNM
damning
to
than
score.
losing to Kansas State.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And UNM allowing 40 points to be scored by UNM against them. It's just, I don't know. This Arizona team is interesting. Obviously, T-Max is a freak of nature, probably one of the top 3, if not the best receiver in college football right now. Already has half a thousand yards, and it's heading into week 5, 4 touchdowns. No Fafita not having a fantastic year. A much worse year than last year, obviously, but he's still dangerous. I think if you've seen Fafita play, he's an explosive and very accurate quarterback with a lot of poise. And 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions this year isn't a great stat line for somebody who almost had Heisman expectations this year. But I think overall this Arizona squad is underachieving, to say the least.
Yeah, I definitely do feel bad because I don't know if you guys remember last year story came out, Arizona athletic department was like $250 million in debt or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really affected their ability to, keep fish. And then it really hamstrung them in, getting the next coach and getting the coordinators and getting the staff and everything. Because
For sure.
when they're $250 million in debt, I'm just not sure how they can justify to, their board, the school part of the university, why they're spending so much money, when they're already in
Yeah.
so much debt.
For sure.
And especially, I feel like I've seen that regression on the offensive side because I feel like last year Arizona had an extremely diverse scheme where they felt like impossible to stop. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
so good. They were fast. They were hitting the guys on target. And I just don't feel that way this year. Dino Babers is the OC. Kind of feels like he's from the Stone Ages, like he's just like kind of like a retread that they're just like throwing out there again. The most discouraging thing I saw versus Kansas State was the slow handoffs.
Mm-hmm.
They would do the classic Utah thing where they take the snap and then it takes 5 seconds to get the ball to the running back. And by that point, the line is completely disintegrated because they've been blocking for so long and it's a 6 yard
Mm-hmm.
loss. Like that was pretty discouraging to me because that's like a scheme from like 2007 that is like not really something that teams do anymore. So I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to, really think they have a chance against Utah after kind of the beating they took at Kansas State.
I will say that Arizona coming off a bye here, I think helps a lot. It helps more than it would help most teams. They had a chance to play Kansas State. They got beat on the line of scrimmage, physical. They saw Kansas State's game plan. They will have made some adjustments if their coach is competent at all. It could turn out that Utah goes into the game next week and they look exactly the same. And at that point, you would say, okay, that was just a mishire. But I do think this game is going to show a lot about their coach and what kind of adjustments he can make.
Yeah, I agree. I think overall, I'm just really excited to watch the Utah defense versus the offense. I'm really excited to just watch T-Mac go at it. It'll be interesting to see if Arizona schemes for T-Mac. I think Scally is going to be prepared for it, just because obviously you can't lose a receiver that's already at half a thousand yards. Not even midway through the season. I feel like he's going to be the number one priority in Scally's eyes, and therefore in the defense's eyes. Definitely going to be some schemes to stop T-Mac. It'll be interesting to see how Fafita performs. It'll be if we will pressure him or if we'll drop back. I think Fafita is one where dropping back can create some turnovers. Especially in a year where he's already thrown 3 interceptions. So I think, in a Rice Cycles nighttime environment, which would be the first true night game, and I don't even remember how long, but it's been a while since we've had a kickoff that's been past 7 p.m. It'll be a really interesting game. I'm excited to watch.
I do think, like you guys have said, that coming off the bye makes them because I do think Arizona has most of the teams on Utah's schedule this year, and that alone, makes this maybe a more interesting matchup because the team didn't change that much. They did have some key losses, but it wasn't that crazy from last year. Like they should be able to play at least kind of similar to that. And, McMillan, obviously one of the best receivers in the country. So, I'm really hoping Cam Rising is back for this because I think with him, I feel super confident in this game. But if it's Wilson, you never know what can happen. Being at home, night game, like Connor said, teams typically don't win in Rice Eccles. It's nearly impossible, as history has shown us, I think. Um, the black throwback unis will probably bring some hype to the game as well. I'm expecting Utah's best crowd in the last, probably since Cam's last season in
Mm-hmm.
2022. And so, yeah, I think that this could be a pretty dynamic game.
I will say the environment could be pretty generational because it's not like a night game in November or something where you're going to be freezing cold. It's not even a night game in October. Like, it's going to be the perfect temperature outside, perfect time. A game that a lot of Utah fans have some hatred in their heart towards Arizona. It's going to be insane.
Yeah, nothing else really to add. Honestly, I think just the environment is going to play a massive, massive, massive factor.
Do you guys think that there's a revenge factor to this? Do you think Utah sees how they were beaten by Arizona last year and they want some payback for that?
I think there 100% is. Witt remembers this kind of stuff. Like, he cares. I think that this game, if it does start getting out of hand in Utah's favor, I think Isaac Wilson comes in and we start passing every single play.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, because I mean, I feel like Utah fans were more butthurt than Utah actually was. Of course, I think Witt's going to use this as bulletin board material for sure. There's no doubt about it. I think Witt is a master, like similar to Kirby Smart, at using anything to pump his team up. But I will say it's a little funny. I think not even. I think it might have been the week before we played ASU. We were up 48-3, and then Charlie Vincent ran a huge run in for like 40 yards, and the sportsmanship thing would have been to just slide and run the clock out. But it's Charlie Vincent. He's been a walk on for 5 or 6 years, and the Utah fans were stoked. He got his, and so when Arizona State fans were mad, we kind of shrugged it off. And then the next week, I feel like a similar thing happened. Jaden Delora, fourth or fifth year senior, last year playing football, got his spot taken over by Fafita. Kind of an unfortunate situation for him. Threw a Hail Mary down the sideline. It was what it was. It is what it is. I think, was it a sportsman-like play? Probably not. But at the end of the day, I feel like just objectively, there wasn't any huge malice intended by it. But I do think Utah remembers that stuff. I think Scally remembers it, Witt remembers it, and I think they're going to use that as motivation. It's definitely a get back game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the keys to the game. So for Utah, we chose sack the QB, double McMillan, and run the ball. Landon, which of these keys do you kind of want to focus in on for Utah right now?
I think sacking the quarterback is interesting in a couple more ways other than the obvious, just like kills the drive. Arizona has proven to be pretty one-dimensional in that they're going to be a pass-first offense. If they lose the ability to let routes develop and pass downfield because there's a lot of pressure, it's going to get extremely dark very quickly, because if you don't have time in the pocket to do the thing that your team is best at, you're not going to be able to move the ball.
Yeah, I agree. I think Utah's going to be the best front seven they've played all year long, obviously. So I think Fafita, we had a lot of injuries. I think Cole Bishop, I don't think he
It
played
was a
last year in the
skeleton
game.
crew.
It really was. I think just a bunch of second and third stringers out there. It really wasn't even a Utah team that went and played in Arizona last year. And obviously we got blown out. So I don't think Fafita's faced a front this good, and maybe his whole career, based on how we're playing. Van Fillinger's having the year of his life, and with Logan Fano, and we do have some injuries on the defense with O'Toole out and Karene still missing. I'm not sure on the status this week. I'm assuming we're still missing both of those, but I feel like this defensive front will do a good job at pressuring not McMillan, pressuring Fafita. Hopefully they can get some sacks and at the very least pressures. And like Landon said, if we can stop the deep balls from developing and pressure Fafita, I think it's going to be a nightmare scenario for Arizona.
Yeah, for sure. I think running the ball will be key. Kansas State did that to Arizona when they played, and it just totally took them out of it because Kansas State would go on these long touchdown drives. Oklahoma State would feel like they'd have to respond. They'd throw a few passes that fall incomplete, and the next thing you know, they're punting. Arizona did not have a scoring drive outside of their very, very first possession, which is crazy when you think about it. So I think running the ball will just allow Utah to control this entire game, make Arizona feel like they need to play catch up, which will probably lead to a couple turnovers, which will probably lead to, more time of possession for Utah. Okay, should we talk about Arizona's keys to the game?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to focus on is explosive pass plays. And I specifically mentioned pass plays here and not just explosive plays in general, because when I envision what it would take for Arizona to win this game, I see an offense that stretched the field. They kind of taken the top. They've got behind the deepest guy. They've had a couple long passes. Their their strategy to win this game is going to have to be kind of like what USC did to Utah in 2019, where Utah's defense, top to bottom, was probably good enough to really smother their offense, but they were able to subvert a lot of that just by going to those deep, explosive pass plays, and their wide receivers just made plays. And so if I'm Arizona, it's hard to game plan for that, but I think you need to at least test Utah and see if that's going to be able to be something you can do.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think for Arizona, the way that Utah plays on defense, they're just straight up ball hawks. And so I think limiting turnovers is going to be huge for Fafita. Like I said before, 5 touchdowns to 3 interceptions isn't a fantastic ratio. And I think I don't think they're going to be able to get the run going against Utah. Which they can try to hold up on the line of scrimmage, but it's just I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's just going to be one of those things where can they get the extent of slight push they need to generate anything in the run game, because I don't think they'll dominate in that facet of the game. But I feel like the their lack of a run game is going to force them to go to the pass, and I feel like they're going to have to be forced to play catch up, and I think that's going to generate a lot of turnovers. Scooby had an awesome interception last game against Oklahoma State. Teo Johnson, we all know his name. He's an absolute dog. Smith Snowden, I feel like Cam Calhoun. I mean, the list goes on. I feel like throwing against those guys, I put our guys up against T-Mac and Fafita pretty confidently. And with Scally scheming behind those guys, I feel like things are going to turn out pretty okay.
Yeah, I definitely do think it's a narrow victory here for simply because, like all of Utah's history for the 7 years, teams haven't really come into Rice Eccles and have been able to win, especially at night. You have the rare performances like last year where Oregon comes in and destroys Utah simply because Utah's entire team was injured and we had Bryson Barnes at quarterback, or like the one 3 years ago during COVID that was USC coming into an empty stadium and winning. But really, those are the only losses that have really happened in the last 5 years. Like Utah just doesn't lose games at home, like regardless of the circumstance, pretty much. It has to be something pretty crazy for them to lose at home. So, it's a narrow path for Arizona. So let's go into the predictions now.
Yeah, so starting off with my prediction, I see Utah winning this one 42-10. I do think Cam is going to play this game, and I think that Utah's just going to have a dominant performance. Arizona State lost by 3 scores to Kansas State, who just kind of got destroyed against BYU, which does reduce my opinion of Arizona a little bit further. So I do think that Utah is going to be able to handle business here. Night game, it's going to be a really tough environment for them. I see Utah with a pretty comfortable 42-10 win.
So Ethan is not here today. He was unable to make the podcast. Ethan predicted 30-7 for Utah. For me, I predicted 31-13. I do not think that Rising plays. I think that he sits out one more week and waits till the bye week and comes back against Arizona State. I predicted 31-13 because I think that 31 points at home seems like kind of what Isaac Wilson would do on average against Arizona. I think the run game is going to be really strong, and I think Isaac Wilson is going to, throw for around 200 yards, which is what he's been doing in most of his starts. And that's going to be enough to punch it in, probably 4 touchdowns and a field goal, in my opinion. 13 points. I think Arizona creates one of those explosive plays. It's Hetero McMillan, gets a touchdown on the board. And then I think they get a pair of field goals on a couple of second half drives. So I think Utah kind of gets up early in this game, and then Arizona's trying to play catch up, and Utah kind of just squeezes the life out of them.
Yeah, and then for mine, I put 40-17. I do think Isaac starts this game. Unfortunately, I would love Cam to start getting some snaps, but I think it's going to be Isaac again. But I think this week is the first week where Isaac can really start uncorking the offensive playbook. Going into Stillwater and beating a top 15 team in the country as a true freshman, I feel like unlocks a lot of things mentally for you. And so I feel like he's going to be a lot more confident in the playbook, especially playing at home, not having to deal with crowd noise like he was at Utah State and Oklahoma State somewhat. The whole stadium is going to be behind him. So I could really see Isaac laying the hurt on him. And if it's rising, then, it is what it is. We're winning that game. But I feel like T-Mac and Fafita are going to get theirs. I think 2 touchdowns is pretty reasonable. I think if you can limit T-Mac, because like I said, he's going to get his. He's probably going to be in the ballpark of anywhere from 80 to 150 yards, just because he's that much of a talent. But I feel like, if we can limit them to under 20 points, I feel like Utah can win this one pretty easily.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the locks of the week. We can review our locks from last week. Landon, do you want to go with yours?
Yeah, I had Ollie Gordon less than 100 rushing yards, and I think he was just shy of 50. So that hit pretty easily. I mean, not a lot that needs to be said about this. He just couldn't run the ball on Utah's defense.
Mm-hmm. I'll go with Ethan's. Dorian Singer over 75 reception yards. This was a really great pick. Dorian Singer finished with 7 receptions and nearly 100. So, big facet of the game. Mine was over on the 51.5 points total. I just felt confident that Rising was going to play. That was all the smoke. I thought that it was going to be a pretty dominant offensive performance for Utah because I just didn't think Oklahoma State's offense was good. But, it was Wilson. We kind of played shut down the clock, and that did not hit.
Yeah, and then mine over 1.5 turnovers generated. With the way Alan Bowman was playing, anybody could have seen that coming. But our defense, just nasty ball hawks, and I feel like they did a great job generating those turnovers.
Let's move on to our picks from this week.
Yeah, so I'll start out with mine. I had Brant Keithy with over 1.5 TDs, and I specified all purpose, so not just receiving. We've been using him in a lot of Wildcat packages, and he even alluded that he could be used at running back occasionally for power runs. I just think that it seems like he's one of Isaac Wilson's favorite targets. He is Cam Rising's favorite target by far. I think he's a tough matchup for Arizona, and I think he's going to have over 1.5 TDs.
I'll go with Ethan. This is a pretty bold pick that Ethan made. Pick 6 streaks continues. I truly hope so because it's looking a little doubtful this year. If we don't get it in the first 3 games, I'm always a little worried about the streak. So I think that's a cool pick. Mine is kind of some reverse psychology stuff. I picked Rising does not play. I've missed like 4 picks in a row. And so I'm picking Rising not to play in the hope that he actually does play. Because choice. Apparently I'm bad luck. So if I say he's not playing, he's probably going to play. So that's my pick for the week.
And then mine is a Dorian Singer TD. I feel like just watching him play with the absolute animosity that he did last week against Oklahoma State, it feels like after every catch he made, he just stood up and did a Covey flex on the defenders, and just the way he played, just like the one-handed catch pinned against the helmet, and just the way he stepped up in a big moment for Isaac. I feel like his time's finally coming. I feel like he could honestly go for a touchdown, or if not more. I feel like he's poised for a big game. He had it last week, and I think he's gonna have a bigger one this week.
Awesome. Well, I think that is everyone's locks. We can move on to our power ratings. So starting off this week, we all had Utah at 1, which I feel like was a pretty easy pick for people to call. Utah, great win against Oklahoma State on the road. Pretty obvious, but what are your guys' thoughts on these next following teams?
Yeah, I feel like we can group 1 through 4, maybe 1 through 5 together. I feel like these are the very clear front runners in the Big 12, if you want to call them that, even though I still feel like it's kind of a big mixing pot. Utah, clear front runner, awesome win on the road against OSU. Then we have UCF, Iowa State, and Kansas State, Oklahoma State, obviously at 4. I feel like Iowa State and UCF have, still undefeated, still showing a lot of promise. Still early enough in the season where we still don't know fully what they look like, but I mean, same could be said for a lot of teams. So, but I feel like we're starting to give them the benefit of the doubt. Kansas State and Oklahoma State both lost to Utah teams. Kansas State's loss looks a lot worse than Oklahoma State's does. Utah's result was more or less expected. Kansas State's definitely was not. if you go look at the box score again, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, that Kansas State game was just a weird game. But yeah, I feel like for the most part, the top five, the top six is kind of starting to be solidified as far as the Big 12 goes.
Yeah, I think the Kansas State and Oklahoma State is pretty interesting because I think the Oklahoma State versus Utah, Oklahoma State obviously had that fourth quarter comeback. They only lost by 3. I think that looks much closer than the actual game was. Utah was dominating that game and almost 200 yards more production than them, and Oklahoma State only had 3 points with 6 minutes left. I feel the opposite about the Kansas State game, where they lost by more than 20. But that game was way closer than that. They just had a 6-minute stretch where they had 2 interceptions that, Avery Johnson threw a ball to a defensive lineman that was laying on the ground, and then he threw one directly into the hands of a receiver, of a linebacker when a receiver was not within 10 yards of it. They also had a fumble to return for 6 and a punt return that was muffed that took a crazy bounce and was also returned for 6. It's like Connor said, like the average success rate, like Kansas State was doing much better than BYU. So I feel like it's a weird dichotomy there where the Oklahoma State game and Utah game looks closer when it was actually a blowout, and the Kansas State BYU game looks like a blowout when it was actually close.
Yeah, Kansas State was actually running for nearly 6 yards per carry and doubled up BYU first downs, more time of possession, more total yardage. The only thing that went against them was just the crazy swing plays. I think they gave up 17 points in 2 minutes, which is just like, that was just a dagger. They couldn't recover from that.
Okay, let's talk about this next grouping here because they're really grouped close together. Arizona, 7.75 average rank, and then BYU and Colorado tied at 8. Like we've mentioned, Arizona bye week, not really much update from last week, and we've talked about them extensively. BYU with a crazy win at home, not something that people saw coming. And they rise, I think, quite a bit from the last, power rankings that we had. Still kind of on the table whether that's a mirage or not, because, there are a lot of fluky elements to that game. I mean, if BYU can keep repeating it, then it's not fluky, but, they've got to prove it on the schedule. It's only a third of the way done.
Yeah, I feel like we already covered the BYU game. Just a weird one. If you want to go watch, just a very luck-infused Saturday night mojo weirdness, Pac-12 After Dark-esque game. That's the one right there. Go watch the replay. Just an insane game, insane environment, fun game, but like I said, just very weird. Arizona, Colorado, and maybe even Baylor, I feel like are kind of all grouped in the same category. Not Baylor necessarily when I say this, but Arizona and Colorado I feel like are kind of paper tigers where they have a lot of offensive power. Arizona, obviously with T-Mac, and then Colorado with Shedeur and Travis Hunter. I feel like those are 2 QB wide receiver duos that really will be able to light up the Big 12 no matter who they play. As far as talent on the rest of the offensive side of the ball goes, and mainly defensive, not a lot to be said there. And so that's why I feel like they're a middle of the pack team. I feel like they have the offensive players to beat anybody, honestly. I feel like Travis Hunter is the top of my Heisman list right now. Shadeur's an amazingly talented quarterback. Obviously, same with T-Mac and Fafita. But right now, I don't think they have enough in the tank defensively to really make a lot of noise in the Big 12.
That game against Baylor was one of the best games I've watched all year, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that was actually crazy. Like,
fantastic finish.
Shedeur actually threw 2 perfect Hail Marys. The first one, like, bounced off the receiver's chest. It should have been an easy touchdown, walk-in touchdown. Yeah. And then the second one actually was caught, which got them to overtime. I mean, one Hail Mary is tough, but to throw 2 perfect Hail Mary throws, that's freaking impressive.
Dude, the weirdest thing about that, if that first one was caught, that actually might have lost them the game because time would have expired. And if he didn't get into the end zone, they didn't have a timeout. It was over. I guess they would have. Yeah. I don't think they could have gotten a spike off. The time went to 0, like while he was on the field.
Yeah. No, it would have.
Like even with moving the chains, like it would have expired. They could not. It would have been at 0. It's just.
I think he could have stumbled in. I don't know. I think
he like it was too, but like if he dropped where he dropped, like with the missed catch, it would have been on the 1 yard line, which would have been crushing.
I do see that. I do see that argument. And then the Travis Hunter, forced fumble on the goal line that goes out the back of the end zone to win the game. That was just superstar
You-
level play right there.
You almost can't make it up. Like, honestly.
Like that was like a Heisman moment if there ever was one.
Well, it's
You
kind
know,
of
like, that was
legendary. Like, Shadur and Travis Hunter go score in overtime, and then Travis Hunter goes out on defense and makes the game-winning play. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, what a player. That guy, he's so good.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
Should we move on to this bottom half teams? Okay, so Baylor here is at 9, TCU is at 10, and Arizona State is at 11. Any of those teams you guys want to highlight?
Yeah, I want to talk about TCU a little bit. They gave up, what was it, 60 points to SMU?
66, yeah.
66. That was almost a bit of like a mirror of the Kansas State game, but the teams were a little bit more evenly matched. Everything went wrong for them. I think TCU is much better than that showing. That game had some weird mojo.
Yeah, I gotta say, TCU is my most disappointing team because I really believed in them. Like, I thought they had a lot. I really liked their quarterback. Who I thought they had talent. I thought they had decent coaching, and they've just done nothing but just choke the whole year. You know, I kind of thought they'd have a bounce back year because I thought 5-7 last year was like pretty unlucky for them. But you know, maybe they just used all their mojo to get to the Natty 2 years ago, and it's just gone.
Paying for their sins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like TCU's kind of been underperforming. I want to talk about Arizona State a little bit. I feel like the hype train was real for them for the first 3 weeks, and then dropping a game to Texas Tech is just absolutely brutal. No other way around it. I think final score was 38 or 32-28, but yeah, I mean the way that Texas Tech has played this year, just really any loss to them looks just awful. So Kenny Dillingham, I still think he's doing an amazing job, but clearly still a lot of work to be done, a lot to work around as far as the rules and regulations that were instilled against ASU because of Herm Edwards. Dude's a bum.
Yeah.
And then Baylor, I feel like Baylor is a step ahead. It's just a slight step ahead of all of these teams. I feel like just a very middle of the pack team. And then I feel like the Cincy to Houston, the kind of the next tier down.
Yeah, to me,
Yeah.
the bottom 6 with this, they're all kind of in a jumble for me right now. Like, who's going to step up and prove it? Because, like, I wouldn't be too opposed to any of those teams being ranked, like, honestly, anywhere in that bottom 6. Like, I don't have a super strong opinion. It's just about who's going to separate.
I feel pretty strongly about that. Like, honestly, like 4 through like 14. Because I think that Utah, UCF, and Iowa State are all undefeated and they've all shown like the least flaws to me. But like 4 through 14 is so jumbled. And like this is like the middle tier parity I think a lot of Big 12 fans were talking about, where like I feel like week to week we've seen our rankings fluctuate so much. And I expect that to just, continue through the first like 10 weeks of the season.
Yeah,
Okay.
completely agree.
Any thoughts on the bottom 2 teams, or are we good to move on there? I don't think either team is
They're
very
just
good.
putrid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if Jalen Daniels could stop throwing the ball to the other team, they might be okay. But
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm sorry for your fans, especially Kansas. That's so dark.
yeah. Okay. So the question of the week last week were how many players have been drafted for the Utes in their program history, and special shout out to DBGII77. He has gotten 2 answers correct in a row. He chose B, 177 players drafted, and that was totally correct. So shout out to him. Great listener of the podcast, has listened 2 weeks in a row. We really appreciate that, man. We really appreciate your comments. So, thanks for responding.
I mean,
great
I love
job
the
on getting the
profile
answer.
picture. That's the 3rd and 17 GOAT Pac-12 championship 2022.
Oh, yeah.
Love to
And the
see it.
freaking late hit on the USC guy. I still cannot believe they called that. The dude was 5 yards
I
into the
know.
end zone. He got
Yeah.
11.
It's like,
Yeah.
bro.
That was wild.
I know. Yeah. But yeah, excellent. Shout out to you. Okay. We'll go to the next question of the week. And these are put together by Ethan. Shout out to Ethan for, putting these together every week. So please comment if you know the answer. Who has the most rushing yards single game for the Utes? And the answers are Zach Moss, Matt Asiata, Joe Williams, or Devontae Booker.
Let us know.
Okay. Yeah. So any final thoughts from you guys on anything we've talked about? State, the Arizona preview, anything at all?
I'm impressed by Utah, and I'm excited to see what they can accomplish. I don't think Utah's ever had this good of a chance to make the conference championship. And it's honestly a unique position that I'm going to be interested how the fans, how the team navigates it, because for the first time since joining a power conference, Utah is now the heavy favorite to make the title game and potentially even win that title game. So I think that's a big perspective shift. And I think that for some people that were mad at that Utah joined the Big 12, like, let's just see how this year goes. Like, maybe your opinion will change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like for any Utah fans going to the game this Saturday, enjoy it because this is probably going to be one of the only night games of the year at Rice Eccles. Rice Eccles after dark is a very, very, very special place. One of the best environments in college football, quite honestly. Against Arizona, I know the game loses a little bit of glamour just because of the way Arizona's performed thus far, but still going to be an awesome game, awesome environment, like we mentioned earlier. Get back game, get to the stadium early, and yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
Yep, absolutely agree. I think the Big 12 presents Utah the opportunity to win a ton of games, a lot more than they probably would win in the SEC or the Big 10, just going up against teams that just recruit at a different level than anyone in the Big 12. So I think it's a good landing spot, and I'm happy to be here so far. Okay, thank you all for listening. It really means a lot to us when you like, comment, and subscribe and, enjoy the video. We love to keep making these for you. We'll keep making them every week. Let us know down below, what we got right, what we got wrong, how much of a homer you think we are, how too much respect to Arizona, too little respect. Let us know. So thank you and go Utes.
Go Utes.
Utes.